Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the responsible business case for land rights. I am Sarah Lowry, your moderator for today's webinar. I am an economist and public-private finance specialist in the Office of Land and Urban at USAID here in Washington. We are thrilled to have Jeff King from Hershey's and Olga Gormalova from ECOM as really the stars of this webinar with us today. And we're also very excited to be hosting the webinar through the USAID family of links, LandLinks, Agrilinks, and Microlinks. Thanks for joining us. In terms of the overall agenda today, first I'm going to set the stage for the webinar by describing some background and context on USAID's work on responsible land-based investments, and of course our pilot with Hershey's and ECOM in Ghana. Then I'll ask the panelists to please introduce themselves. After that, I'm going to ask a series of questions to our panelists. And then finally, we'll open up the discussion to your questions. So please do send them in. You can do that via the chat box that should appear beneath the screen that shows me speaking now and the panelists when they're speaking. Or you can do so via Twitter. So just use the hashtag #BusinessCaseForLand, and the 4 is a number 4. And then we'll also receive those questions, and we can ask a subset of those to the panelists towards the end of the webinar. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible, but given how popular the webinar is, we probably won't get to all of them. We'll send them in, we'll get to the ones that we can. Okay, so let's get started. Our Office of Land and Urban works with USAID missions around the world to understand the local land and resource tenure constraints to achieving our really important development goals, like improving food security, enhancing natural resource management, reducing conflict, empowering women, and many other development goals. We also work with our missions to design programs that strengthen legitimate land and resource rights in inclusive, participatory ways so that everyone, especially the most vulnerable, has critical access to the land and resources that provide them with food, shelter, and many other services. Given that it is estimated that 70% of land is unregistered in developing countries, this is really challenging and really important work as well. A lot of our work in this area centers on modifying or strengthening land and resource laws and policies. We also strengthen land administration systems themselves. We improve the capacity of local land institutions. And we also test or scale up innovative technologies or tools that strengthen people's land and resource rights, such as our mobile application to secure tenure, or MAST. Another important part of our work is on responsible land-based investments. And this part of our work really has 3 main pieces to it. First, at the request of the private sector, USAID has developed guidance for companies that outlines the steps to undertake to make sure that their investments respect the legitimate land and resource tenure of people in or around the land that they plan to invest into. We've also worked with donors and other organizations to synthesize both our own guidance and those that have been created by other organizations into the very succinct, very practical analytical framework for land-based investments in African agriculture, which, despite the name, can really be applied across the world to many different types of investments. So that's one work stream. The second work stream is a new one for us, and we're really excited to have just launched earlier this week a brand new investor survey on land. The idea of the survey is really fourfold. One, it's really to demonstrate if and how investors measure and price land-based risks in their pro formas and other types of analyses that they do as they're making their investment decisions. 2, to quantify the value and location of foregone investments because of land issues. How much money is really being left on the table by responsible investors because they're concerned about land risks of these investments. 3, to quantify the costs of projects gone wrong. When there are land issues that come up, what are the costs? And then 4, also really importantly, to present successful case stories of land risk mitigation strategies and successful projects. We'll be publishing an analytical report in the spring of 2018, and we believe that it will be really valuable for investors, for example, to understand how the group of them the group of investors are really thinking about these issues and how, especially on the case study side, how successful projects come to fruition. It will also be really useful for us at USAID, other donors, civil society, as we continually work to make the case for governments and other stakeholders that clear, enforced land rights are really essential to attract responsible investments into agriculture, forestry, energy, etc. So that's our second work stream. And then the third work stream is our responsible investment pilots. So we are partnering with companies in 3 of these pilots that seek to achieve complementary goals of 1, increased tenure security for companies and their supply chains, and 2, increased production. So we at USAID are combining our technical expertise in land rights, and the companies are contributing their business know-how, of course, and their relationships with their suppliers to achieve these shared and complementary goals. So first, we're partnering with Alovo Sugar in Mozambique. And if you're not familiar with that name, Alovo is the largest sugar supplier to the Coca-Cola system in Southern Africa. We're also working with the Moringa Partnership in Kenya. And the Moringa Partnership is an investment fund. We're working with them on one of their investees in Kenya. And of course, with Hershey's and ECOM in Ghana. So in this pilot, USAID, together with our implementing partners, which in this case is Tetra Tech, Windrock, and LandMap, is mapping farms and clarifying the lease agreements between tenant farmers and customary landowners. This is really important because the old lease agreements often stipulated that tenant farmers only had access to the land if they continuously produced cocoa on it. Now that many cocoa farms are quite old and not as productive, tenant farmers rarely cut down the old cocoa trees to plant new ones in fears of losing their access to the land. Meanwhile, ECOM is working with farmers to co-manage the replacement of old cocoa trees and the upkeep of new seedlings on a portion of the farmer's land, as well as to establish non-commercially valuable shade trees on that land in order to produce shade-grown cocoa. In Ghana, the government owns certain commercial tree species and naturally grown trees, so planting shade trees that do not fall into these categories are really important. With our combined efforts, cocoa yields on these farms should increase, and the greater number of shade trees will serve as a modest, albeit important, sink for carbon. And that brings us to our webinar today. We are very pleased to have Jeff King, who is the Senior Director of Sustainability, CSR, and Social Innovation for the Hershey Company with us, as well as Olga Gormilova, who is the General Manager of ECOM Agroindustrial's Sustainable Management Services in Ghana and Nigeria. So Jeff and Olga, if you could please introduce yourselves and your companies to the extent you like. Thank you. Jeff, why don't we go with you first?
Okay, I was going to go into the presumption of ladies first, but okay, I'll go first. So thank you very much for having me here today. As Sarah said, my name is Jeff King. I lead our global sustainability, CSR, and social innovation team at the Hershey Company. Hershey, as many of you will know, is the largest chocolate manufacturer in North America. We have been in business for almost 125 years. And of course, many folks know that we're one of those companies that was founded by a man who built a company who built a town. So this idea of giving back and sustainability and community livelihoods really is baked into the DNA of the company. And we bring that effort and those thoughts as much as we can into our work, and especially as we've been investing in building cocoa communities and trying to ensure their long-term sustainability and livelihoods.
Thank you, Jeff. Olga, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I think maybe people on the webinar do not know much about ECOM. So ECOM is also a leading global commodity merchant and sustainable supply chain management company. So basically we are present in over 40 different origins or countries that produce different commodities. And we mainly focus on coffee, cotton, and cocoa. We are the largest, I think, one of the 2 top supply chain managers in coffee, and then the largest coffee miller, and amongst top 4 commodity merchants in cotton and cocoa. I think we pride ourselves in taking sustainability as a part of our business rather than doing it as a CSR. We actually integrate it in a lot of decision making. So sustainable management services that I manage in Ghana and Nigeria basically takes it that we want to be a leading service provider to the farmers and delivering to them the most needed services that create impact on their livelihoods. I have been working for ECOM in Ghana and Nigeria since 2012. My background is in development. So yeah, I bring my passion in development to the private sector. And yeah, we manage in Ghana, I manage a large team of agronomists who basically are spread all across Ghana and focus on delivering extension services and other products and services to farmers.
Great, thank you, Olga, and Jeff too. It's great to hear a little bit about your history, and I'm going to follow up on a couple of the points you made in these introductions in my questions. But first, I want to get to our first question. Of course, this webinar is about the business case for land rights and why land rights are important to your companies. And so I wanted to ask kind of an intro question regarding how have your respective companies historically been concerned with land tenure risks or issues in your supply chains? And if not, if it's been something more recent, what is sort of prompting this closer attention to land, for example, that we're working on through our pilot with you? And Olga, why don't we start with you on this question?
Okay, so I think whilst ECOM has a long history of buying different produce from farmers without really engaging with intermediaries, to say that we have been concerned for land tenure risk, I think would be wrong. But I think what has been happening so far is that we are aware, we are very much aware, because we are so close to the farmers, we are aware of the challenges that the farmers face due to various land tenure arrangements that they are under, especially here in Ghana. But we never really knew the role that we could play in this puzzle, or we didn't really know from our perspective of where we sit, like how do we tackle this issue. So I think it's also an important element to understand that when ECOM started delivering sort of sustainability services to a client, the client was always a chocolate maker. Sustainable cocoa to chocolate makers, our concern really was how do we deliver what the client or the chocolate maker wants, and so that it meets the requirements. We were possibly less concerned of what does it really mean from the farmer perspective. And I think here it's we also always say that I think land tenure is possibly goes beyond certification, and I think people that are following sort of cocoa sustainability trends always think that, well, when chocolate is certified, it's a good product. But I think now, because we are so closer to the farmers, we realize that certification possibly is just scratching the surface, and so a land tenure is a real problem that needs approach and a different solution. So like now, I think ECOM and Hershey have moved to a stage where we believe that we don't just need to scratch the surface, but we really would like to deliver something or act on something that is so close to the farmers. We really want to work on something that resolves the real need of the farmer. So I think the land tenure has come up for us as something like we feel more engaged working on this now than we did before. What we also realized that like if we have worked so hard to develop a primary procurement network that allows us to buy cocoa from so many farmers, now we can leverage the same primary procurement network to deliver to farmers a service around land tenure issues. So we can work with partners to create something more meaningful to the farmer, and hence the farmer also then more committed to working with us in a partnership. So yeah, I think in short is that we were aware of the issues, we just didn't know how to act on it and what really to do. working in a partnership like this with USAID, and especially with land tenure experts like Winrock International, it really helped us to start turning our minds to issues that really concern farmers and not just the chocolate maker.
Great, thank you, Olga. I think that speaks a little bit to your role, right, as an as a trader, as an intermediary between the farmers and your buyers, Hershey's and other clients. So I'll follow up on that later. But Jeff, in the meantime, let's hear from you about Hershey's kind of attention to land rights historically and why that might have changed in recent years or months.
Absolutely. I think many of us who, when you start to work in cocoa, you start to recognize that land tenure rights, or what the farmer needs to try to do to navigate them or be able to impact their farm in a material way, has really been a disincentive for many of the practices that we would try to educate a farmer, which folks think of as good agricultural practices, whether that's replacing your trees, putting in shade trees, a lot of the things that you mentioned sort of in the opening statements. And it's always been a challenge for one company or one organization to impact the land tenure laws of an entire nation. So while we recognize this, very similar to what Olga said from an ECOM standpoint, we've been looking at how do we impact this. I think this project coming along has been eye-opening from the standpoint of multiple groups coming together to be able to provide solutions to the farmer for this issue. And our hope is, as we move forward and try to scale this, that it attracts attention at that national level. So perhaps land tenure laws can start to be changed for the betterment of the cocoa farmer.
Great, thanks. That's a really important point. Of course, changing laws and policies and regulations takes a really long time, whoever's working on them. And in the meantime, this pilot and others hopefully demonstrate that we can make some progress on this issue together. Okay, great. So let's move on to the next question, which Olga, you got at a little bit in your opening statement, but I was curious how you think about land rights for your suppliers in terms of do you think about it in terms of your core business, and how is that incorporated into your core business, or does it more fit into sort of the corporate social responsibility a bucket, and sort of why? So maybe actually I'll jump back to Olga on that, because you did start to address it in your opening remarks, but I'd love to hear a little bit more from you on that topic.
I think we cannot at the moment really conceptualize it as a core business, because and if I say it, people will doubt it, because people will say, well, our core business is to buy cocoa. But I think what has happened is that over at least in the sustainable management services with extension work, we felt frustrated that we train farmers, we tried to create impact at the farmer level, but many times we see that sessions farmers actually do not implement, or like 5 out of 10 cases wouldn't implement the practices that we have trained them. And after engaging in this for me personally, for over 5 years, you start asking questions. Is there the reason for this? Like, is there something else that you haven't tackled? And I think, so land rights now, or the insecurity around the arrangement the farmers have with the landowners, the caretakers, the sharecroppers here in Ghana, we realized that actually this could be the reason why we are not seeing progress on certain things that we really would like to see progress. So at the moment, I think within our business, it wouldn't be something that we would call corporate social responsibility. I think at the moment, what we would like to do is that how we can integrate it into our business, that we don't ignore it, that we at least incorporate and work with it, that we work with partners to create solutions. And then possibly, I think one of the examples that jumps to my head is mapping of farmers. So, for example, 4 years ago, when we started GPS mapping all the farms of the farmers that we buy from, and here in Ghana is from about 200,000 farmers, so it's not an easy task, but really we did it from a perspective of Hershey's, for example, or other chocolate makers, that they asked us and they wanted to have traceable supply chain. So we did it from that perspective. But about the land rights and the work that we have been doing with Windrock is actually makes us think that the mapping that we did before for Hershey's can now be turned into something that will help a farmer secure the rights, or have or it can create a documentation, or it can contribute to a documentation that the farmers can then take anywhere and say, okay, I have this farm, it's been mapped, this is the size, and everyone around this farm agrees that this is mine. So I think more and more, I would say that at the moment we're in the process of trying to define how this could be turned into a product that we deliver. Like, how can we create, how do we tackle this issue? Like, how do we tackle a challenge and turn it into opportunity for us as a business, and something that the farmers really need? Because at the moment, we always see a lot of startups emerging, trying to deliver this. But maybe the reach is sometimes quite limited because they operate at a smaller scale, and we can I think amplify their efforts by doing it within our business.
So Olga, it sounds like I've heard you correctly. The work with us, with Windrock, and the pilot has helped ECOM better understand that insecure land tenure is a constraint to farmers employing the different techniques and skills that you have taught them. And so because of that, hopefully there'll be continued effort, on your part and of course on ours, to address that tenure insecurity in sort of whatever way you decide sort of going forward. Is that right?
Yes, I think it's correct. It's just that I guess it's just become, we cannot ignore this anymore if we really want to see impact. And impact, I mean, if we want to see productivity increase, if we want to see cocoa not deforesting, so I think we just think that this is a key component, and if we keep sort of ignoring it or leaving it on the side, it's going to, in the next 5 years, we won't achieve the impact that we really would like to achieve with the farmers.
Okay, great. Thank you, Olga. And now over to you, Jeff, for your response. How does Hershey's think about land rights as a part of your business, as CSR, especially as you're the buyer? How is that incorporated into your business model?
Well, I think as we've said, I think multiple folks, as all three of us have said, is that, as I said, land tenure at the moment is sort of a disincentive to do a lot of the things that we think if the farmer did, they would have better livelihoods. So I guess how I think about this, and I'll just talk about the project in particular versus just land tenure, because land tenure is a piece of the project. It's sort of where can CSR end and a business begin? And because I am a believer that business leads to sustainable long-term solutions. So if you think about this particular project, we fund it with a CSR, with a grant, to try to prove that this system can work. But for long-term sustainability, we sort of need everyone to win. And the way that as we've talked about how this could scale up, definitely if you can help solve land tenure, then the farmer can invest, can plant multiple crops to have diversified income, increase their incomes, make things a lot easier to navigate. And then if the farmer knows that he can win long-term economically, he's willing to now make the investment. Now, you may still use, as we talk, CSR or development dollars from whether it's Hershey or USAID to sort of put some of those systems in place to get loans moving and get the whole project going. But I do believe if you make it part of the core business, not just for us, I mean, the farmer is running a business as well, and we always have to remember that, then everyone along that supply chain is able to win. And that's a lot of how we try to think about these solutions.
Thanks, Jeff. I think I'll follow up, actually, give my next question to you, which you started to kind of talk to a little bit, but I'm wondering for you, what is your biggest learning or takeaway thus far from the pilot? How will this impact you, Jeff, as the Senior Director of Sustainability at Hershey's and or the company at large? I mean, it's a pretty small pilot as pilots go, but we're hoping at least at USAID to have some big impacts with it. And so I'm just, not to pressure you, but just wondering, kind of what what your biggest takeaway is and how it could impact you or Hershey's kind of business going forward.
I think there's a great learning coming out of this, that as many of us come to the table and think about forming partnerships on projects, right? Many folks coming to the table may have a list of priorities, but everyone tends to have one priority that perhaps is extremely most singular, right? So some folks, you might say, really are working on land tenure, like yourself. I mean, you study it, and there are other folks who really might care about deforestation as their primary goal. Some folks, it's just farmer livelihoods, and some folks, it's, I'm really invested in cocoa and cocoa production and increasing yields and long-term sustainability of the crop. But if you think about that, a singular project like this, all those groups who may have that as their topmost need can have that need met by coming together and getting behind a project like this. And I'm hoping that that's as eye-opening to others as it was to me. You don't always have to agree on your number one priority, but it can all trace back to, if we work on this one particular project, multiple needs can be met. I think that was eye-opening and, quite honestly, very refreshing for me. And I think as we start to look at other partnerships, we'll try to dive deeper and deeper, versus just saying, if we can't agree on the number one priority, then maybe we won't have a partnership.
Great, thanks, Jeff. That's a big sort of aha moment, what I would tend to agree with too. We can all be striving towards, we'd all be working on the same project, right, with different goals, and those goals can potentially be met. I mean, for us, we care about strengthening land tenure, we care about yields and both, but in this project, right, we're achieving those and other goals as well. Okay, well, I think I'll turn it back over to Olga then. Olga, for you, what's your biggest learning or takeaway from the pilot, and how will this impact you in your role as a general manager at ECOM?
Well, I think we didn't talk really about the fact that we talk about land tenure, but the fact that, linked to land tenure, what SMS does in this pilot is that we tied it to farm rehabilitation. So farm rehabilitation service that we felt was farmers were not rehabilitating cocoa because they are old aged cocoa farms. Because of this, well, one of the reasons was the land tenure insecurity. So I think the learning has been is that it's definitely a risky, like if you would like to invest in cocoa farm rehabilitation, the way we are trying to test in this model is that it's really risky, but it's not impossible. So it's like there is a lot of risk. Cocoa, I mean, is an agricultural crop, so it has risk of weather and everything else. And so I think we learned that we need diverse partners, first of all, and partners that are willing to take risk. And you kind of go outside of what everyone is doing and testing something new. And it's also, you're taking farmers' farms and you are doing something with somebody's asset. You have to be very careful about what you do and what is the outcome of it. So we have learned that, in engaging diverse stakeholders with different expertise. So here, for example, again, to reiterate that Windrock International really helped us to delve into issues that we didn't really realize. So before, like we were already actually ready to pilot our rehabilitation service, but we didn't realize that if we don't consider land tenure, we are just a section of the farmers. So we can never scale up. Even if the pilot is successful, we can never scale up without considering land tenure, because it will only address the needs of the owners. But in Ghana, there are so many caretakers and sharecroppers that we will just, like, our service will be ignorant of their context and of their needs. What we also realized is that the more we worked on our model and in this pilot is that I think it's possible, especially now that there is a lot of conversations about how to tackle deforestation within cocoa sector. I think we also realized that within our pilot, or within how we approach cocoa farm rehabilitation, integrating the income diversification for farmers is extremely important. So I think we need to, even for our business that has always sort of focused on cocoa, we realized that we need to focus on other crops that farmers are growing, and not just crops. We need to make sure that farmers have a stable and secure cash flows outside of cocoa harvest. So meaning that once they have diversified income and they can be more secure, there will be less pressure for them, or for the sector, to move into areas like forested areas, that if they can have income that they can invest in the existing farms, it will really reduce pressure from forests. And I think it also, this pilot gives us like a glimpse on the different ways that we can tackle this issue, right? So a lot of times people see it as a huge issue and we don't know what's the solution. And we are really practically trialing something that can, well, at least we believe at this point that it can really work and can be sort of a game changer. And from ECOM perspective, I think that we do engage with producers very closely, but at this point we are moving even closer to them, and we are now becoming present at the farm level. So ECOM board already, for example, asked me, so are we now becoming a farm manager and not just supply chain manager? And so I think we are moving from being we are looking at all these issues to being an active advisor, to actually working with the farmers on the farms, passing on to them the expertise that we have in-house from our agronomists. It's a very interesting time, and it changes the way we do business. And really, I mean, I have been in this for now 5 years, and I have seen really how the move have shifted from focusing on managing the supply chain to now managing farmers, and so I think it's an exciting time, and I can foresee that there is a lot of interesting opportunities that will arise of this.
Thanks. It's definitely an exciting time for us, and we're really enjoying the learnings that are coming out of the pilot, both for you all and for us. And thanks for bringing up the deforestation issue as well. Of course, agriculture is the biggest driver of deforestation around the world, and although not the only solution, certainly not a silver bullet, helping farmers sort of expand vertically, increasing yields, etc. Hopefully, at least in the short term, and perhaps with other measures, will sort of lead to reduced deforestation in the long term. Again, not the silver bullet, but certainly can be a helpful part of the equation. So thanks for mentioning that as well. Okay, so I'm going to ask one final question, and then we're going to get into audience questions. I wanted to jump back to Jeff, although I have a similar question for Olga, to you as well. I was hoping that you could help the audience understand, me and the audience understand each of your roles in the cocoa supply chain and kind of the levers that you might pull to make changes on sustainability generally, including with land. So for Hershey's, as sort of the end buyer, as consumers, we see our brands. We may choose to buy from one brand or not based on some sustainability measures. And so it's important, you have lots of different sustainability goals, including on land rights. How do you work with your supply chain, again, in your role? How do you work with your supply chain to encourage the actions taken that you would like to see? And then, also for you, Olga, as the trader, which is a little bit more of a black box, I think, for us in the development community. We focus a lot on farmers and kind of production on the ground, and maybe with buyers like Hershey's, but often we're not quite as sure maybe about the motivations of traders, and maybe how to work with them. So hopefully this pilot, of course, is giving us shedding a little light on that. But I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit more to also the levers that you use to make changes and what you're responding to. You mentioned that you're mostly responding to your buyers. How do you kind of encourage shifts on the ground? So sorry, that was a little bit of a long-winded question or set of questions. Hopefully it came across, and Jeff, maybe we can start with you to talk about the role of Hershey's in making change.
Okay. I was trying to take notes. There were a lot of questions. That was not just one question. And you talked a lot about you mentioned each role in the supply chain, and how do you think about all of the levers that you could pull on? And it's an interesting lead in, because I mean, you're right. Cocoa work is hard. There are lots of things that we could do. And many times, like, you think of a lot of these, all of the different issues we're talking about. I mean, it's an interconnected web. I mean, you pull on one of those strings and all of them move a little bit. And you're really trying to figure out what is the number one thing we should be focusing on, along with then trying to do lots of things that we're being asked to do all at the same time. And it is challenging. And you also asked, how do we work with our suppliers? From a Hershey standpoint, your supplier relationships are critical. We as a company do not have people on the ground working on farms, or working with the farmers. As Olga said, they're not farm management, but they are the ones who are there, disseminating information with the farmer, trying to really understand at the farm level what are the things we should be focusing on. So those relationships are critical, and it really truly has to act as a partnership, not just with our suppliers, but as an industry in total. And I think only other thing I would say is, as you've mentioned, which levers to pull. I think a lot of this is, we're still as an industry learning what are the best levers to pull. If you look at Cocoa Action, right? So there you have all of the major manufacturers and suppliers coming together to try to move in a pre-competitive way to, continue the long-term sustainability of cocoa as a commodity and as a livelihood, and as a key ingredient for chocolate from our standpoint. And it was mentioned before that we were focusing on productivity very heavily. I think the industry has shifted to, it's productivity, and cocoa is a part of it, but it's about livelihoods, and it's about diversification of income, which is where we get into why tenure is so important, so that farmer can diversify their income in a much more long-term sustainable way, whether that's just planting timber or alternate crops that aren't on the right list, so to speak, along with rehabilitating their farm. That's where we're focusing a lot more now on the total livelihood picture. Now, will this be the exact lever to pull a year or two from now? I honestly cannot answer that, but I know as an industry, we're committed to keep working on this piece, and then moving to the next piece and moving to the next piece. I think until we get this entire web, as I mentioned as I started, or this puzzle, absolutely right, to ensure the long-term sustainability of cocoa as an industry, as a business for the farmer, and then as a key thing that we all enjoy in our products.
Yeah, challenging, complicated. Well, I've come away with the understanding that it's not less complicated than I thought it was. Okay, Olga, how about over to you? How do you fit, and how do you make change either up the value chain or down the value chain?
So maybe I will pick a little bit on this concept of trader, which I think, when people always think, if people start maybe researching on who ECOM is, and when people brand us nowadays, I think it's a bit of a misnomer, because, to trade cocoa, you could be sitting in London or Dallas or any other big city and just sort of look at your screen and trade. And somebody else could be tracking your cocoa across very remote locations. Whereas I think for us, and for the team that I have here in Ghana, we are based, right here in the middle, in Kumasi, the Ashanti region, in the middle of sort of a cocoa growing area. All our agronomists are spread. And what I think for us, we realized that we're just a trader. And I think what happened also, that within our business, we realized that we didn't want just to be a trader, because we've put a lot of efforts to bring ourselves, it has been within our strategy to come closer to the farmers. So once we are so close, what happens is that when you interact with farmers on a day-to-day basis, you hear their concerns, their challenges, and what happens if you don't challenge, or you don't start addressing those concerns and challenges, farmers turn away from you, as a partner, or they start looking for other partners, and we feel it straight away. So maybe Hershey doesn't feel it because they are far away, but for us, immediately you feel, well, they are not supplying, or they are going somewhere else. And so for us, being relevant to them, a simple reason to have enough cocoa to deliver to Hershey's in this situation is that we need to, we need to understand very well what are the real needs of the farmers, and not sort of like just the needs that we read in articles and some publications. And so for the team, I always say that I think what we can do is we should be the best listeners on the field, because not everyone has this privilege to be so close to the farmers to understand their reality, and then we need to convert those real needs and stories and tell it to others. So tell it to chocolate makers, tell it to donors, and to explain really we see what is needed to be done at the field level. And whenever like we engaged in relationship like with Hershey, it has always been, Hershey has always asked us as well, so what is it that is a focus at the moment for the farmers, or what is the key area, like, so what should we do? So before it was a little bit more like, okay, these issues are important, let's tackle them. But I think now, and I think where our role is very key, is that we bring farmer closer, or like we bring his story and his context, or her story and her context, so that we work on issues that really bother farmers, I think. And at the same time, I think we can also, on the ground, if we change little practices, for a trader or a buyer, if we change certain practices within our business, so we address issues like land tenure and the rest, we also set an example for others. So maybe at the moment are not taking this or are just sort of pursuing the commercial, buying cocoa. But I think once they, like, people don't want always to take the most dangerous or the most risky steps. So once we step there and we lead, and they see that it is possible to do certain new things in an innovative way, I think we see followers. That's great for the industry. It's a great thing, because if you're doing something new and relevant to the farmers and others follow, that's also it starts changing lives for not just 120,000, 150,000 farmers, but for 800,000 farmers that are in Ghana. So I think and that's, I think, our sort of role in this field is.
Thank you, Olga, especially for shedding a little bit of light on your role as a trader, which is very, I don't know what the association is, but your description of you needing to be a good listener and making sure that your farmers are supplying to you as much as possible and having really good relationships. It's a bit different than maybe other people have kind of understood the role of traders. So that's really helpful to help people have a sense of what you do and why. Okay, so let's get into some audience questions. We have some great questions. We'll try to get through as many as possible. So first, we're going to start with a question from Albert Marley. And this is for you, Olga, so you can stay on the screen. The question is, with your experiences working in Ghana, do you think there is a sense of commitment on the part of COCOBOD and the government of Ghana to work at resolving land tenure issues in the face of efforts being put in by companies like Hershey and USAID?
I think, it sort of relates back to the question that you gave me at the beginning, saying, has ECOM been thinking about land tenure before? I think COCOBOD and everyone here, the other stakeholders in the sector, are very much aware of the issues and aware of the importance of resolving this issue, but possibly also didn't know really how do you tackle. So COCOBOD, for example, is a regulator. So how do you tackle from their perspective this issue? Because it's a whole complex, I'm sure people who work in land tenure understand it's a whole complex situation with chiefs and, with arrangements, and sometimes we don't even understand understand how they are made. And so I think now tenure has come up on everyone's agenda. And I think there is commitment. So we see more people not just talking and discussing the challenges, but really trying to come up with solutions and trying to figure out really how do we tackle it. I think I like this change. We have seen, meetings organized also in leadership by Cocoa Board. World Cocoa Foundation has picked up this topic as well. So I think the urgency of sort of and to deal with this issue is really now on top of everyone's minds. And and I hope that also Cocoa Board and everyone can listen to some of the lessons that we would like to share from this pilot. And more practical lessons. So because I think fear, like how do you do it? And so I think here we will have at least some proposition of how we could possibly tackle it together. So yeah.
Thanks, Olga. Good to hear it's on the minds of many people. Hopefully we'll make some changes going forward. Okay, so the next question is from Tara Clerkin, and that's for both of you. So let's start with Jeff and give Olga a break. The question is, have you leveraged any technology platforms to improve your understanding of the producers in these supply chains, especially in regards to land tenure and use? For example, satellite imagery, GIS mapping, etc. So yeah, not sure, Jeff, you can tackle it, or Olga, if you have a better understanding, you could go as well. It sounds like whoever has the answer.
No, you said it was my turn, so sure, Olga can help me out. So in specifically land tenure, so we have leveraged technology as a company to learn about the farmer and deliver, let's just say generically deliver services to the farmer. Specifically for land tenure, as you talked about, I mean, GPS mapping, to be able to use a mobile device, walk the farmer, be able to actually map his or her farm, and then to be able to register that has been a great service for the farmer to really understand where my land ends, your land begins, along with, as you talk about getting closer to the forest frontier, truly understanding how close you are to know not to proceed any farther from an expansion standpoint. That would be one piece of technology. We've also used in the past and are expanding on it in the future mobile technology to deliver information to the farmer. CocoaLink, which we at Hershey worked on with various partners in Ghana, gets a lot of this, as you would say, good agricultural information to the farmer with text, and we're exploring how to use video as well. To try to get information, not just learn about the farmer, but be able to deliver information to them. And then you sort of get in this reciprocal relationship where you're able to learn a lot more from the farmer with these, trying to leverage mobile technology.
Thanks, Jeff. Olga, is there anything you want to add to that?
So I think Jeff mentioned, I think we have been using for a long time already GPS mapping. So we have been mapping the farms for, I think, possibly for the past 5 years. But I think what we have started doing now as well, we collect a lot of data, not just the kind of the boundary of the farm, but we collect a lot of data from on farm management practices of the farmers, so how they upkeep the farms. So for us to understand and to use this information actually to segment farmers so that we can deliver appropriate services to farmers and not just sort of like a blanket solution to everyone. So all of our agronomists now are equipped with tablets, so they're able to collect information on the farms. We can deploy different surveys at any point and can sort of understand if we want to test maybe a product that we have in mind. We always deploy tablets. We don't use paper surveys anymore. I think for land tenure, the measurement and the polygon will be very important in creating documentation that farmers can use. I think also thought, for example, of using the same, tablet and data collection for tree tenure. So there isn't just land tenure. In Ghana, there is also a slight challenge around owning your trees. So we wanted to see how we can collect data and then help farmers register their trees with with our tablets. We've used Garmin's before, and now we have started exploring sort of use of drones for monitoring and maybe how to integrate, receive. It's still a very exploratory work, but we definitely always on the lookout. What are the technologies there that can help make our work more efficient? I think within ECOM, we don't believe that technology is a solution for everything, but I think we believe that if it's combined with the people and the advice, then it can really make our work more efficient and really can help farmers receive information much faster. And not just information, mobile payments or other things. So yes, we definitely always explore that.
Great, thanks to you both. So on to the next question. This is from Christy Stickney, and she says, what are examples of specific sustainable agricultural practices that farmers are reluctant to implement because of the perceived or real insecurity of tenure? And Olga, I don't know if you want to maybe start us off on that question. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think maybe this question is really we didn't really explain maybe a lot about the pilot and the fact that the way ECOM has joined into this pilot is around rehabilitation. So in Ghana, for example, the issue is that 40%, we estimate that 40% of farms are over their productive age. And what we have seen that even if you educate farmers, they don't rehabilitate. So they don't, and what I mean don't rehabilitate, they basically do not cut down the trees on their farm. So they might sort of replace some trees, but it doesn't allow you to set a new productive farm in the best possible way. So, and in this pilot, we realized, well, then tenure, the fact that a farmer is in the arrangement that he has to change what he's growing on his farm, or even not allowed to cut down the trees to replant, it prevents him from practicing that. I think this is one of the things that has puzzled us for a long time, and we see that if we resolve it, and it's not something that just puzzled us. We have seen from the data when we extended our rehabilitation service and asked farmers to join, only landowners joined. So I think initially we didn't question why is it that people only joining this because who own their plot. And later we realized, well, those who don't own are they fear that as soon as they cut down the tree, the land will be taken back. That's one of the examples that I can give.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I mentioned a little bit in the introduction, but thanks for expanding on that, Olga. Jeff, do you have anything to add?
What I would add to that, I mean, Olga's right. It prevents from doing things that we might recommend. And here are two things that are linked. If you want to talk about farmer diversification, and if they could plant timber trees, it can do two things for them. One, provide some shade cover. And I've been told that, from our agronomist folks, that with a little bit of shade cover, between 10 and 30%, you can improve your yields. And if that farmer puts in those shade trees, someday they could choose to cut that tree down if they needed the income. With current land tenure, that farmer puts in a timber tree, he doesn't actually own it. It's owned by the Forestry Commission. They could come and cut it down whenever they feel like it, tramp on the person's land. So again, it inhibits what we would say is some good agricultural practices of shade and the ability to diversify income.
Thanks, Jeff. Those are really important points.
I think maybe I can also add just one more thing that came to my mind is that I think it's also about kind of investing into the farm for the long term, because if you don't have security around your land, you basically farm it and you want to exhaust the farm and you want to maximize everything that you do on it at the moment. So I think it prevents farmers to think, well, I don't have security about this land, so in 20 years' time, my son or my daughter cannot actually have any ownership or cannot have any right to this. So whatever I do, I will not prune or I will not replant. So it's like all their management decisions are for a short term. And I think, with cocoa being a crop that grows over 30 years, these type of decisions are not optimal and definitely not sustainable. And because of that as well, we are pushed into and other areas. So I think once farmers are secure about their land rights or how they are supposed to use this, right, they can pass it on as well, and they can pass on a more productive asset to their children. Then we want also, I think we will avoid this conversation around that really want to engage in farming. And I think, once you have a productive asset that your parents hand over to you, and it would, I think it can create a different type of in which we can work. And I think that is also important. For this reason, it's important to focus on land tenure.
Okay, thanks. I think those are really important points, and really gets at the key reason our office works on land tenure, because people can only really focus on the short term if they don't know they'll have land, right, for the long term, and it's really critical to secure that tenure so that they can think about 20 years down the road passing on land to their children or whomever, or selling it, etc. Okay, so we are running out of time. We have time for at least one more question. So I'll ask this and then see if we can fit in another one, but it could be the last one. So this question is for Miriam from ECOM Trading. She says, I like Olga's input on forming partnerships to solve land tenure issues. My question is, to what extent can the private sector be involved in land tenure, especially in areas where land is either fully owned by the government and can't necessarily be sold, although it could be leased, or there is some sort of hierarchy to getting land? So for instance, a chief gives out land, or it's passed on in a hereditary manner. In this case, to what extent can the private sector come in? What are the risks that the private sector has faced regarding those instances? So I'm not sure if Olga or Jeff jump in and tackle that challenging question.
Yeah, I think it's a very complex question, but I think for us, so I think our role is not to change maybe how land is allocated and to who. I think we as a company have to be very careful how we intervene in these decisions. We cannot change the fact that land is vested in chiefs or is with the government. But what we can do, because we have such a large outreach to farmers, we can make sure that we work with experts. So I don't necessarily think that we as ECOM have expertise to address this ourselves. So we definitely need experts to help us figure out how do you really engage at the community level. So who do you talk to? How do you facilitate that actually the chiefs are creating better arrangement for the farmers? So it might not be us fronting those discussions, but the fact that we can bring somebody on board, and then it will, we can create programs that sort of reach out to so many farmers. I think that's what we can do. So I think we don't say we are limited in what we can really do or with what we can say, but we can engage the right stakeholders to help us engage with land. And we have seen it that, for example, in this pilot, for us, when we are a buyer of a produce, we go to a group of farmers that supply to us, but land tenure issue is more of a community issue. So it engages also, it concerns farmers who don't supply to us. And so for us, it's a little bit sometimes problematic to engage level. So this is where it's extremely important to engage with those who can work at a more broader community level and not just at a buyer's group or at a kind of suppliers group.
That's a good point. Engaging other stakeholders is critical, certainly for our work, and it sounds like for yours as well. Jeff, did you have anything to add to that?
I think, and you've already said, I mean, it's a challenge for any one company or even a group of companies to come in and state what your system should be. And I don't think that's really what we would advocate. We might say, pick the system that you want, then just make sure that it's, I was just jotting down words, you might say understood, consistently applied, well documented and enforced. At least then everyone knows what the rules are and how to play by them. Then how we've been looking at it in this, and especially in this particular project, then is how can we help if we understand what the rules are? how do we help the farmer navigate the system? That may be something then that we can bring to the farmer, in today's current environment, and then even as a broader group, folks would be advising the government just to, perhaps use those very broad level words that I was saying. We could continue to help the farmer just to navigate the current system.
Thanks, Jeff. And thanks to you, Olga, as well. You both have been fantastic panelists. I think we could talk about this topic for hours to come, but unfortunately our time has come to an end. This has been super interesting for me and hopefully for the audience as well. I also want to give a shout out, besides to you, Olga and Jeff, also to our co-sponsors for this webinar, to Microlinks and Agrilinks. The webinar has been recorded and a link will be sent to everyone who registered in a wrap-up email, and it will also be available shortly on LandLinks. And also, please be on the lookout for future webinars on this topic of responsible land-based investments and the business case for land rights. We hope to have at least one more webinar, probably in the spring, focused on Olovo and our pilot in Mozambique. And we would love to field similarly smart and interesting questions from the audience then as well. So my final thank you is to the audience, who has broken all of our records on registrations, I think, with over 400 registrants. So thank you, and until next time.